This morning I'm joined by Dan Held from ZeroBlock and Nick Meliones from the Bitwall project. Dan, can you tell us a little bit about ZeroBlock?
ZeroBlock is basically a newswire service. Right now we have an iOS app. It has gotten some pretty good traction with consumers, and we're going to take that and we are almost done with a website that has a dashboard-style interface. In addition to that, we're also looking at Android. So we're looking at being the first cross-platform news service for mobile and the web.
So now the reason why we're talking about that today, and the app as it stands is great. I've tried it myself and used it, and if I were more of an app person, then again, it'd be something I'd be using on a regular basis. But the reason why we're talking about this today, actually, Nick, has to do with your project. Nick, you and I met at Bitcoin 2013, and I kind of, ambushed you talking about how Bitcoin was going to be revolutionary for monetary transactions and kind of the way we do business on the web. You kind of took that concept and ran with it. Can you tell us a little bit about your Bitwall project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I should start off, first of all, by thanking you for the discussion involving microtransactions, because that was definitely very formative in terms of my understanding of the power for Bitcoin in terms of what it can do for microtransactions. And yeah, so we ran at the Bitcoin conference. We won the Bitcoin conference hackathon with Bitwall. And Bitwall is a micropayment platform for digital publishers. So anyone who's monetizing content online, we're building a platform that allows them to work with our widget and ultimately an API and start accepting micropayments for their content. And so one of the reasons why we're excited about this platform, but also really enthusiastic about working with Dan and his team, is that with current payment products, the transaction fees are pretty high and a lot of times prohibitively high, given the size of the transaction for content that you could sell. But with Bitwall, we're able to knock the transaction fees much lower and really enable smaller transactions for this digital content.
So what is Bitwall? You said that it's a paywall application. How does that work, and how is it leveraging Bitcoin to make it work?
If you're going to be on ZeroBlock's web platform, for instance, and ZeroBlock being the first platform that we're going to be working with, when you go to ZeroBlock, as you're consuming content, as you click on an article or click on content to consume, we can help monetize each piece of content. And so essentially it can be one-click payments for that content. And with Bitcoin, with the transaction fees being as low as 0.0005 Bitcoin, there's an opportunity to really power these low transactions of such a small amount that wouldn't even be possible previously.
Dan, why is this something that's appealing to you? I'm sure that you looked at other models when you're doing what you're doing. Why is this the way that you've gone?
I have to admit, I listened to your podcast about content monetization, and really my whole life I've kind of been intrigued with micropayments. Why shouldn't I just pay 1 cent when I read an article or pay 1 cent when I watch a YouTube video? It's something I've kind of been enthralled with. And whenever I saw Nick won the hackathon, I shot him an email and I was like, hey, we're a news aggregator. I think that your concept would definitely work on our platform. We're just excited. It's a pretty new thing in the area of news, and, you get New York Times and Wall Street Journal having issues with having these very large paywalls. And so we're hoping to actually create a functional paywall that doesn't have 90% of the users drop off afterwards.
So how does this change that? What is it that's happening differently than a paywall in another circumstance here?
So me and Nick have pondered this question quite a bit. How do we create a frictionless environment for our consumers? So we've come up with a few different things. For instance, these are going to be very, very small micropayments. We're going to create a buffer account. So when a user signs up, they get $2 free, something like that. And in addition, I read this once where someone came up with an idea that either the consumer pays for the content or the consumer broadcasts it on their social networks. So if you broadcast the article on your social networks, you get like a day free. So basically the content either gets propagated or monetized.
Huh. That's a really interesting approach to it. So now, one of the things about paywalls is that you need to have original content behind them. At least that was my assumption. Are you generating original content? What exactly are you charging for with your service?
As everyone has seen with Pulse, people are really moving towards news aggregators. And what we plan on doing is sharing 80% of the revenue with the original content creators. So basically, we're going to create a platform that's able to plug in news sources. So these news sources, originally, the only way they could monetize content was either doing a paywall or advertising. Now you can just plug into an existing news aggregator and instantly monetize your content, and you don't have to worry about the back end with Bitwall or anything like that. We've already done all that.
Yeah, and Adam, one thing I'd like to touch on, going back to the concept of comparing this to traditional paywalls. With a traditional paywall, if you're going to dive directly into the subscription model, there is a pretty high attrition rate. There's been some cases where you've seen up to about 70% attrition in terms of consumers as soon as they hit that paywall. And so by offering a more dynamic pricing model, enabling people to not necessarily buy a subscription right off the bat, but give them a chance to consume content, pay for the content they're consuming, or as Dan put it, have an opportunity to post about it on Twitter and propagate it through social media. It gives these different ways for consumers to be engaging in the content and not necessarily have to commit to a full subscription at the minute.
So one of the issues that's been kind of a hot topic in the Bitcoin community is this idea of dust transactions. Transactions that are so small that they essentially don't justify the fee that has to be paid for them. Now, you mentioned paying 1 cent per article or per piece of content. And I think that, yeah, you're right. That's really where the compelling stories are, because at that low price, I mean, there's just no reason not to, unless you absolutely have no resources whatsoever. If you value it in the slightest, that is literally the smallest amount of value that you can possibly send to it. And so I think that that's something that a larger number of people will find more appealing. But the flip side of that is that right now, if you look at the transaction fee, it's about 6 cents per transaction. Do people have accounts with Bitwall where they deposit a certain amount of money and then you handle those transactions off the blockchain and then only do like a reckoning every day? Or is every transaction, every page that you're viewing a separate transaction that incurs its own fee?
We are working out the internal logistics of that right now, but we do intend to make use of the off-blockchain transactions, with that being the most viable option there.
So what's the pricing model then? Can you share that with me? Or is this something where you guys are still trying to figure out what the formula should look like? Where are you right now with this?
Yeah, so we're still working on a lot of logistics of that one. But in terms of the off-blockchain transactions, that was something where as soon as that became readily available through the protocol, obviously something that we're very excited about, it definitely gives us a better venue and a better platform to be authorizing transactions as low as 1 cent. Because like you said, for each time you broadcast the blockchain, with the transaction fee being around 5 or 6 cents, that does put a lower bound in terms of what the transaction fees can be. But now with the off-blockchain transactions, that opens up a whole new world of opportunities in terms of how low we can drive the transactions. Long story short, though, we are still working out the logistics of all that.
So, Dan, you mentioned that 80% of the money that you're raising through the use of this paywall system is actually going to go to the original content creator, whereas what you're running is an aggregation. You essentially are a curator, right? You take streams of information and new articles coming from around the web, and you combine them into one site or service that then essentially makes it so that can be the one space you go. Now, that's not an uncommon model, but I think it is uncommon to take that model and to send most of your revenue to the people who are actually creating that original content. How did you decide to do that?
First, I looked at existing models. There was Pulse and Readability. Readability really took the model to a direction that I liked. What they did is they charged a subscriber amount per month, and it was like $3 or $4. And what they did is they took that revenue and then put it in a segregated account for all of the original content publishers. By segregating 80% of the funds that are generated through this paywall, we basically set that aside for original content publishers so that may allay any sort of concerns that we're generating revenue off of their content. This basically provides a platform for them to get that revenue, but also allow the consumer to take in different feeds of content.
So what are you doing with the remaining 20%?
Well, we've been playing around with the idea of taking that 20% and creating a new meetup in San Francisco. Right now there's a meetup with Trade Hill, and we love the Trade Hill meetups. Those guys are great. Everyone there, you got the Coinbase guys there, Ripple there. It's a ton of fun. But it is a little bit exclusive. You've got all these very big Bitcoiners, but you don't necessarily have new people coming in. So we'd like to take that 20% and start a new meetup kind of for people that are new to Bitcoin and introduce new people to Bitcoin.
Okay. So is there any revenue model that is actually generating money for ZeroBlock?
We've been working on the back end, taking this news feed, and what we've been doing is working with, I can't disclose the name of the company, but we are going to perform sentiment analysis, and we are going to sell this data feed to trading platforms. And we have, there's one called RTBTC that we've been in talks with for the last couple of months. They might be one of the first ones to be using that feed.
That's a really interesting model. So even though this is an application that is being provided to consumers, the only compensation that's being derived from the actual consumers is going to the creators or going to help incentivize new users essentially into the Bitcoin space, albeit locally. I mean, the San Francisco thing obviously is only local, but that, I mean, and so then your monetization platform comes entirely from sponsors on the other side of it who are using your data feed. Now, where are you getting this sentiment data?
What we do is we have collated, I think it's around 20,000 articles now since early April. And we take those, we scrape the text out of it, and then we send that to our server. And the server performs sentiment analysis with NLP, natural language processing, and then returns that as a number. So it could be positive or negative number based on the verbiage inside of each sentence. And we take that feed and we send it unprocessed to the trading platform. That way, the trading platform can take that positive or negative sentiment, and you can take that number and then weight it however you like. Because if we did the weighting customized on our end, basically everyone would see the same weighting. You know, you might value something such as a 51% attack, or MTGOX is down, or MTGOX has liquidity problems. You know, each one of those has a different meaning to different people. And so we're thinking about letting the trading platforms really weight those values.
That's a really interesting approach to it. If somebody wants to download the ZeroBlock application or visit the ZeroBlock website, what's the process for doing that?
Yeah, well, check us out in the App Store, ZeroBlock. Check us out online, ZeroBlock.com. Within the next week here, we're going to be rolling out our web platform. It's pretty cool. It's a nice, slick dashboard.
Sounds good. I look forward to seeing it. Nick, so what's next for Bitwall after this? I mean, this is the first implementation we've seen. Do you have others already in the line, or is the idea to really focus in on this particular project and get it right and then take that model and aggregate it?
We've been definitely focused on this first implementation. Right now, we are heads down trying to get our first product out, and we're excited. I mean, working with the ZeroBlock team has been spectacular, and we're working out, as we've seen while discussions with Dan, thinking through new ideas and new ways to lower barriers to entry for someone who wants to consume content, and also remove friction on the payment side. It's been spectacular. So, as we said, we're gearing up to launch our first product with ZeroBlock. The next steps will follow suit shortly thereafter, but right now we're definitely heads down, building this out and making sure that users have multiple ways to engage on the platform.
So, you know, end of the day here, if you're successful with this, what does Bitwall wind up becoming? I mean, are you an invisible company that just integrates as a platform, or are you going to wind up putting out a service out there that anybody can opt into?
Anybody can visit the website and sign up for a service. It works in two ways. So if you are a merchant or a publisher, you can access the portal and then register your company to receive access to the code we provide for them to implement on their page. And then as a consumer side, if you're consuming content on ZeroBlock, you also would be able to go to Bitwall and register for your account in order to allow you to access content across various platforms. But it's true, though. At the end of the day, we are trying to obfuscate ourselves from the process as well, so that people, when they're on ZeroBlock, that's a ZeroBlock experience. We don't necessarily want to be intruding in that. So,
last question. What's the monetization model for Bitwall? Or are you not really focused on that part of it right now, more focused on the functionality?
Ultimately, the revenue model, I don't know the exact numbers behind it just yet. So we're still figuring out what percentage we're going to take, but we would take either a percentage of the fee, or we would charge a subscription model. So essentially, people who are using the product would pay a subscription to use it.
It's very exciting work you guys are doing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this continues to develop, and thank you for coming on the show to talk about it today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Let's Talk Bitcoin is heard each week by thousands of people who are participating in the new digital economy. Our listener base of Bitcoin owners, miners, investors, technologists, and merchants is growing fast. We offer a limited number of short advertising slots in each show to keep our listeners engaged and to provide maximum impact for our sponsors. If you'd like to talk to us about Let's Talk Bitcoin, send us an email at sponsors@letstalkbitcoin.com.
If I showed you a website where you could easily purchase electronics from the world's largest distributor with Bitcoins at 0% markup, would you think it was too good to be true? Good news. It's real, and it's at bitcoinstore.com. Choose from 500,000 items, save money over Amazon and Newegg, and convert your Bitcoins to real-world items. You can even buy with privacy. All they need is a shipping address. But don't take my word for it. See for yourself at bitcoinstore.com.